Welcome to Stories for Sleep, a place where stories are told not to wake you up, but to gently guide you into sleep. If at this moment you are lying in the darkness, your eyes already closed, yet your mind is still wandering somewhere, you are not alone. Many of us carry heavy thoughts into bed, and sometimes what we need is not complete silence, but a story gentle enough for the mind to loosen its grip. In this video, we will explore the most calming truths about the Big Bang, the birth moment of the universe, in a very different way. There are no complicated numbers, no dry theories, only soft fragments of science, philosophy, and deep reflections on the human mind inspired by the spirit of Carl Gustav Jung. These stories are designed so that you only need to listen, no need to understand, no need to remember. If you are looking for a YouTube channel that helps you fall asleep more easily each night, consider subscribing to Stories for Sleep. We regularly share new stories, slow, peaceful, and gentle, created especially for those quiet moments before sleep. Now take a deep breath, and when you are ready, we will begin the first story. There are nights when you lie down, turn off the lights, and let the outside world slowly fade away. Yet the mind refuses to rest. Thoughts drift endlessly. Nameless questions arise, and a sense of smallness before the vastness of life appears all at once, making sleep feel fragile. Carl Gustav Jung once said, "What is most frightening is not the darkness outside, but what we do not understand within ourselves." And sometimes the greatest questions of the universe help the human mind find its deepest peace. The Big Bang, the moment the universe was born, is often described as something enormous, violent, and beyond imagination. But from another perspective, the Big Bang was not merely an explosion. It was more like a quiet beginning, where everything was once gathered into a single point, before gently unfolding into space, time, and life. Jung would have seen this as an image of the collective unconscious, a place where all potential exists before taking concrete form. In the moments before sleep, our minds return to a similar state. The boundaries of consciousness soften. Reason grows tired and gives way to intuition, to primordial images that Jung called archetypes. And it is precisely at this time that listening to simple, gentle truths about the universe can soothe the mind like an ancient lullaby. This video is not meant to teach you astrophysics. It does not ask you to understand equations or complex concepts. Instead, we will slowly walk together through the most relaxing truths about the Big Bang ideas that help you feel that you are not lost, that your existence is a very natural part of this vast universe. When you understand that everything from distant stars to your own breath right now comes from the same beginning, a strange calm begins to arise. As Jung suggested, the deepest healing does not come from control, but from understanding. Allow yourself to listen. Let these stories drift slowly, like stars moving across the night sky. And if you are looking for a place where your mind can finally rest, perhaps you have arrived at the right place. Introduction. The night sky as a lullaby space. There is a very special moment that happens every night, yet we rarely notice it. It is the moment when the sky turns dark, when daylight slowly dissolves, and stars begin to appear slowly, silently, as if they had always been there, simply waiting for humans to become quiet enough to notice them. In that moment, the world does not disappear, but it softens. Sounds fade, movements slow, and the mind, if allowed, can begin to relax. Beginning with the image of the night sky is not a random choice. In the depth psychology of Carl Gustav Jung, the night sky is an archetypal symbol, an image that has existed in the collective unconscious of humanity for tens of thousands of years. Before electricity, before clocks, before linear time, humans looked to the sky to understand themselves. And even today, when modern life surrounds us with artificial light and screens that never turn off, the night sky still holds that ancient power. It makes us feel smaller and therefore lighter. The invitation to look up at the night sky does not require a physical action. It is an inner movement. Jung believed that when consciousness becomes tired, the mind naturally returns to primordial images. Water, darkness, the sky, the cosmos. These images require no explanation. They do not demand analysis. They only need to be felt. And for this reason, the night sky becomes an ideal doorway, guiding the listener from tense wakefulness into receptive stillness, the foundation of sleep. What matters in this introduction is not explaining what the sky is, but restoring an emotional relationship between the human being and vastness. During the day, we live inside the ego tasks, roles, responsibilities, expectations. At night, especially when looking at the sky, the ego begins to shrink, not in a frightening way, but in a liberating one. Jung called this the moment when the ego temporarily releases control, allowing the unconscious to speak. The invitation to relax and rest is therefore not just a calming phrase, it is permission. Permission to stop trying to understand, to stop controlling thoughts, to stop forcing sleep. In Jungian therapy, the deepest healing often occurs not through effort but through surrender to the inner flow. Sleep works the same way. It does not arrive through force. It arrives when we stop trying to make it happen. The familiar yet mysterious image of the night sky creates a subtle paradox. It is both safe and vast. Safe because the sky has been there our entire lives. Vast because we can never reach it. This combination creates the ideal state for the mind, before sleep held yet unconfined. Jung believed the human psyche constantly seeks balance between order and chaos. The night sky offers both constellations form patterns, yet the space between them is infinite. When the introduction invites the sky to lead the mind into stillness, it activates a very natural process introversion of energy. During the day, psychological energy flows outward, working, communicating, reacting. At night, that energy needs to turn inward. When this transition is blocked, we experience restlessness and anxiety. When guided gently through images like the night sky, the mind naturally shifts into a slower rhythm. A successful bedtime introduction should not stimulate curiosity in the sense of, I must know what happens next. Instead, it should create the feeling, I don't need to go anywhere. I can stay here. And the night sky, with its silent, undemanding presence, is the perfect space for that feeling. On a deeper level, Jung might say that when we look at the night sky, we are not only looking outward, we are looking into our own unconscious, dark, deep, vast, and full of unnamed potential. And strangely, rather than fear, humans often feel peace before that vastness. Because at a deep level, the psyche understands this is where I belong. Beginning with the night sky is therefore not just a storytelling technique. It is a ritual of transition from wakefulness to sleep, from control to release, from the personal ego to a sense of unity with something larger. And when the listener is gently invited into this ritual, without pressure, without demand, the mind begins to do what it already knows how to do, find its way back to stillness. When humans were very young in evolutionary history, the night sky was not merely a background, it was a silent companion. There were no ceilings, no electric lights, no constant noise. When darkness fell, early humans sat by fire, gazed upward, and let their minds drift among distant points of light. In those moments, no one had to think anything. Thoughts came and went naturally. Sleep arrived as something inevitable. Jung believed these memories never disappeared. They simply sank into the collective unconscious, waiting to be awakened by the right images. The night sky is one of the most powerful of these images. When we look or even imagine a star-filled sky, a very ancient part of the psyche recognizes, I have been here before. I was safe in this vastness. That is why the introduction does not rush. It leads not through logic, but through rhythm. Each sentence, each pause, each image is placed like a small stone on the surface of water, not to create waves, but to allow the surface to slowly become still. A gentle voice, speaking of the night sky, does not require precise visualization. It only needs to evoke a feeling space is opening, and you do not need to fill it with thought. In Jungian analysis, the state before sleep closely resembles the dream state. The boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness thins. If at this moment the mind is overstimulated by information or anxiety, the unconscious responds with tension, restless dreams or insomnia. But when welcomed with neutral, expansive and slow images like the night sky, the unconscious opens naturally. The night sky asks nothing of you. It does not demand naming, measuring or explaining. And this is precisely why it becomes an antidote for the modern mind, a mind conditioned to analyze everything. When the introduction emphasizes the sky's familiar mystery, it reminds the listener, you do not need to control everything to be safe. Another subtle element is the invitation to rest. In modern culture, rest is often treated as a reward, something earned only after enough effort. But in Jung's view, rest is a primordial need requiring no justification. When the listener is invited to rest without conditions, the nervous system lowers its guard. The body understands there is no threat, and when the sky is placed in the role of guide, the mind no longer has to find its own way. It can be led like a child soothed by a familiar story. No climax, no surprise, only steadiness and presence. Jung once wrote, "In the darkness, the most important things of the soul are whispered." The night sky is precisely this kind of healing darkness, not the darkness of fear, but of containment. By placing the listener within this space, the story prepares for a journey not outward, but inward, where stories need no conclusion and sleep does not need to be achieved. Ultimately, the night sky in this introduction is more than an image. It is a quiet reminder, no matter how complex daytime life may be, there exists a space where you do not need to become anything. You only need to exist. And sometimes that alone is enough for the mind to loosen its grip and drift into sleep. Looking at the stars is looking into the past. There is a very gentle yet profound truth about the night sky. Every time you look at the stars, you are looking into the past. Light does not arrive instantly. It takes time to travel. Light from the moon reaches Earth in just over a second. Light from the sun takes more than 8 minutes. And light from distant stars can take hundreds, thousands, even millions of years to reach your eyes. This means that what you are seeing may no longer exist in the way you imagine. That star may have changed, or aged, or perhaps it went out long ago. And yet its light continues its journey patiently, silently, until it finally arrives here in this very moment, while you lie in the dark, listening and breathing more slowly. Carl Gustav Jung would likely not see this as a purely astronomical fact. He would see it as a living metaphor for the human psyche. Because in the unconscious, many things we see every day no longer exist in the present. Memories, emotions, sorrows, even old joys, all are like starlight born long ago yet still illuminating our present. When you look at the night sky, you are not simply observing the universe. You are standing before a living archive of time. No labels, no dates, no clear order, only silent points of light, each carrying a story that began long before you were born. This creates a very special feeling in the mind before sleep, what Jung called the expansion of inner time. When we realize that the present moment is not the only moment that exists, but a meeting point of countless pasts, the mind begins to slow. Urgent worries shrink. Pressures to fix everything now soften. Because if light can travel millions of years just to arrive here, perhaps not everything needs to be resolved in one night. Jung once wrote, "The unconscious does not forget. It waits." This sentence applies perfectly to the night sky. The sky does not erase what once existed. It preserves it in light. Every star you see is a trace, a message sent from a distant past. And when that message reaches you, it does not demand understanding. It simply exists, reminding you that time is far more spacious than we think. The human mind works the same way. Many feelings you experience today did not originate today. They come from old moments, sometimes childhood, sometimes experiences you thought were forgotten, and sometimes from even deeper layers Jung called the collective unconscious. Hearing that looking at stars is looking into the past can feel strangely comforting, because if even the universe carries its past forward naturally, then perhaps carrying old emotions is not a failure. It is simply human. In the context of listening before sleep, this truth is powerful. It helps the listeners stop fighting memory. Instead of pushing old thoughts away in bed, they can be seen like stars, not touched, not fixed, simply noticed and allowed to pass. The night sky teaches a very gentle lesson. Light does not rush, time does not pressure, and existence does not need to prove itself through action. When the mind accepts this, it slowly shifts from alertness to witnessing, and in that state, sleep begins to open not as something you must achieve, but as a natural return. 3. The stars, the galaxies, and our place. When you look up at the night sky with the naked eye, there is something very strange that we rarely notice. All the stars you can see, whether scattered or gathered into constellations, belong to the same place. They do not come from every corner of the universe as we often imagine. They all lie within the Milky Way, the galaxy in which Earth resides. This may sound surprising because the night sky appears so vast that it makes us believe we are seeing everything. But in reality, we are standing inside a very small room of an enormous building, looking only at the familiar walls around us. Other galaxies, worlds far beyond the Milky Way by millions or billions of light years, appear only as faint smudges if we have a powerful enough telescope. To the naked eye, they are almost invisible. Carl Gustav Jung might smile at this fact, because it mirrors very closely the way human beings experience their own minds. We often believe that we understand ourselves, that what we are conscious of represents our entire being. But according to Jung, consciousness is only a very small island of light rising from a vast ocean of the unconscious. What we clearly see in the mind, our thoughts, memories, and sense of identity, is like the stars of the Milky Way, familiar, close, and limited. Realizing that we see only a tiny fraction of the universe is not meant to make us feel small in a frightening way. On the contrary, it brings a deep sense of relief, because if we cannot see everything, then we do not need to understand everything. And in the moments before sleep, this realization is profoundly important. The night sky, when seen with this gentle perspective, no longer demands knowledge. It becomes a whisper. Existence does not require omniscience. Seeing only a small part is not a failure, it is the very nature of being human. All the stars we see belong to the Milky Way. This can also be understood as seeing our own psychological home. In Jungian language, the Milky Way can be viewed as a symbol of the personal unconscious, the place that holds the memories, experiences, beliefs, and emotions that have shaped who you are today. The other galaxies, distant, faint, almost impossible to see, are like the deeper layers of the collective unconscious. They exist, they influence you, but you cannot perceive them directly through ordinary consciousness, and that is completely all right. In modern society, we are often urged to expand awareness, to understand more, to reach the deepest layers. But Jung warned that moving too quickly into the infinite can be destabilizing. The human mind needs gentle boundaries. Just as the human eye can perceive only a certain band of light, the mind can only take in part of reality without becoming overwhelmed. The night sky reminds us of this in a very soft way. It does not reveal the entire universe to you. It shows you only what you can receive in this moment. And it is precisely this limitation that creates a sense of safety, something deeply needed before sleep. As you lie down and listen, knowing that I am a small point in a galaxy and that galaxy itself is only a part of the universe, can dissolve much of the pressure you carry. Personal problems, daily worries, begin to lose their absolute grip, not because they do not matter, but because they are no longer the whole of reality. And in that moment, the mind can begin to let go. If you have ever seen images of distant galaxies through a telescope, you may have noticed something curious. They do not appear sharp and clear like the stars of the Milky Way. They appear as faint, mist-like streaks of light suspended in endless darkness. They do not demand attention. They do not assert themselves. They simply exist. Carl Gustav Jung might say this is exactly how the deepest layers of the unconscious operate. The deepest parts of the psyche never shout. They do not appear as clear thoughts or precise memories. They exist as vague feelings, fleeting intuitions, or dream images that cannot be fully explained. And like distant galaxies, they can only be felt, not grasped. In the context of listening before sleep, this has special meaning. Many people struggle with insomnia because they try to understand everything, understand their emotions, their past, their future, why they are the way they are. But Jung reminds us that not every layer of the psyche needs or should be illuminated by consciousness. The night sky teaches a very gentle lesson. Some things only need to be acknowledged, not explained. Those faint galaxies still exist even if you cannot see them clearly. And the invisible parts of you exist in the same way. They do not disappear when you stop paying attention, but they also do not require you to dig, analyze, or decode them, especially in the fragile moments before sleep. When the listener understands that seeing only a small part of the universe is natural, they can also allow themselves to know only part of who they are. And paradoxically, this brings deep peace. Human beings often fear feeling small. We worry that if we are not important, our existence will lose meaning. But Jung offered a very different view. The more the ego tries to place itself at the center, the more tense it becomes. When the ego is placed in its proper position as part of a whole, it can finally rest. Recognizing that we see only a tiny fraction of the universe is not a diminishment of humanity. It is a liberation. You do not need to carry the entire sky. You do not need to understand the whole universe. You only need to be where you are, a small but real point within the vast flow of existence. In Jungian language, this is the moment when the ego steps back from the center and allows a sense of unity to emerge, not dissolving into nothingness, but being held by a larger order. Like a small star in the Milky Way, not central yet, not unnecessary. Before sleep, the mind is especially sensitive to safety. And there is nothing safer than knowing you are not responsible for everything. The universe was moving long before you arrived, and it will continue to move afterward. This does not make your life meaningless. It makes it lighter. When the listener is guided to this understanding, slowly, without instruction or pressure, the nervous system begins to relax. Breathing deepens. The body softens. And the mind can finally stop trying to keep everything together. The night sky, with its familiar Milky Way stars and its faint, distant galaxies, becomes a psychological map. It not only tells us where we are in the universe, but gently whispers, "You do not need to go any farther right now." And sometimes simply being in the right place is enough for sleep to arrive. See, Polaris, the slow movement of Earth, and a sky that is not fixed. For thousands of years, humans have looked up at the night sky in search of something to hold on to. Amid countless stars drifting silently across the night, there is one star that seems never to move. It stays in place. It remains there. It becomes the compass of the sky. Humans call it Polaris, the North Star. Polaris is not the brightest star. It does not shine dramatically, but it carries a special meaning: stability. Sailors used it to navigate. Travelers looked to it to know where they were, and in the human psyche, it became a symbol of something unchanging, a permanent pillar amid chaos. Carl Gustav Jung would call this an archetypal image. Humans, at an unconscious level, are always searching for a center, a fixed point to hold on to when everything else shifts. For centuries, Polaris played this role not only in the sky, but in the human soul. But there is a very gentle and very profound truth. Polaris has not always been the North Star. The Earth rotates not only on its axis each day, but also in a very slow movement called precession. One full cycle takes nearly 2,6,000 years. In this movement so slow, it is almost impossible to notice. Earth's axis gradually shifts. As a result, the north point of the sky also shifts. Thousands of years ago, humans looked to a different star and called it the North Star. Thousands of years from now, another star will take its place. What appears eternal is in fact moving too slowly to cause panic, but enough to change everything over time. What makes Earth's movement remarkable is not its speed, but its absolute slowness. It does not rush, it does not shock, it does not disrupt order. It changes the world in a way that only the patient can perceive. Jung once said, "The most important transformations of the soul do not happen in moments, but in silence." Earth's precession is a perfect expression of this truth. The night sky still looks familiar. Constellations remain. Polaris stays where it is, at least within a human lifetime. And so the human mind believes there are things that never change. But at a deeper level, the universe is shifting. Not violently, not with warning, simply continuing onward. In Jungian psychology, this is how the unconscious works. Core beliefs, self-images, life patterns do not change suddenly. They change slowly over years through experience, through moments we barely notice. And one day we look back and realize, I am no longer the same person. Listening to this story before sleep can bring a quiet comfort. If even the sky, something that seems permanent, changes naturally, then inner change is not a sign of failure. It is part of a larger movement. And most importantly, this change does not require you to do anything. It is happening just as Earth continues to move, even as you lie still with your eyes closed. Humans have a deep need to believe that something will always remain. A reference point, a habit, a familiar image. For centuries, Polaris served this role. It did not need to be the brightest. It only needed to be in the right place long enough for trust to form. But Earth's slow movement reveals a subtle truth. The stability we feel is often stability on a human scale, not absolute stability. What does not change for decades may be shifting across millennia. What remains within one lifetime may differ across many. Jung saw in this a profound psychological lesson. The ego seeks centers, identity, beliefs, roles, relationships to define itself. When these centers change, even slowly, disorientation can arise. But Jung emphasized that disorientation is not failure. It is a sign of deep reorganization. The sky is not fixed, yet it does not collapse. Earth's axis shifts, yet days and nights continue. Seasons still come and go. Change does not destroy order. It reorganizes order across a longer rhythm. When this truth is received before sleep, fear begins to loosen, the fear that if what I rely on changes, I will not be okay. The universe shows that change can be gentle. Within the mind, such gentle shifts happen every day. Old values fade, new desires emerge, directions soften. And like the sky, the mind does not announce these changes. It simply continues slowly enough that we can still live, love, and sleep if we allow it. Polaris becomes a symbol of the ego's center, but precession teaches that centers can change without the world ending. When the ego allows its center to be flexible rather than rigid, rest becomes possible. This is crucial for sleep, because much insomnia comes from trying to keep everything in place, holding on to who we were, holding on to plans, relationships, self-images. But when the sky whispers, "Even I do not stand still," the mind can release the burden of permanence. Deep rest does not come from everything being frozen. It comes from trusting that movement is not a threat, that you can lie down, close your eyes, and allow the world inside and outside to keep moving in its own rhythm. In the quiet darkness before sleep, the story of the North Star becomes a lullaby. It does not promise rigid eternity. It promises gentle continuity. Movements so slow they do not startle you. You do not need to stay awake to guard the universe. And when the mind understands this, it can do what it has known how to do for a very long time: drift into sleep as softly as the sky drifts through time. Wu. Ancient humans and the sky as the first map. Long ago, before humans drew borders, before compasses existed, Before satellites silently circled Earth, the night sky was the first map. Not on paper, not in machines, but a living map suspended above every person every night. Ancient humans did not study the sky, they lived with it. They looked to the stars to know when to plant, when to move, when cold seasons would arrive, when rains would retreat. The sky was a calendar, a guide, a rhythm of life, and more than anything, it was a silent storyteller. Carl Gustav Jung saw in this not just history, but a primordial psychological relationship between humans and the cosmos. Before humans separated themselves from the world through modern rationality, they did not treat the sky as an object. They experienced it as part of themselves. Stars did not merely exist above. They lived in stories, rituals, and dreams. Perhaps this is why ancient humans slept more deeply than we imagine. Their minds were not cut off from a larger context. When night came, they knew their place within the order of the universe, without needing to think, without needing to worry. In bedtime listening, returning to this image, humans gazing at the sky as a map, brings an ancient sense of safety. A feeling that says, we once knew the way, and we were not lost. Before clocks, humans did not measure time in minutes or seconds. They felt time through star movements, the length of darkness, the moon's position, the repeating patterns of constellations. Time was not fragmented, it flowed. Jung believed this was a fundamental difference between ancient and modern minds. The modern mind obsesses over measurement, control, optimization. The ancient mind lived in cyclical time where everything returns, where nothing rushes, where each phase has meaning. The sky once served as a calendar without words. When one constellation rose, it signaled planting season. When another set, it signaled rest. No one managed time. Time guided people. This created deep harmony, what Jung called synchronization between inner life and the outer world. Listening to this before sleep slows the modern mind. It remembers that time is not always something to chase. Some rhythms need no goals. Some nights need no plans. The night sky whispers, you do not need to know the exact time to rest. And that whisper is powerful. Before roads were drawn on Earth, humans traveled by invisible roads in the sky. Constellations were landmarks. Nomads, sailors, migrants followed star patterns to know where they were going. No compass, no coordinates, only familiarity with the sky. These journeys were not only physical, but psychological. Ancient humans carried trust in an ordered sky. And if the sky had order, then their journey had meaning. Jung would call this the archetype of the path, the deep belief that life is not random chaos, but a journey with direction. When we trust in a larger map, fear of getting lost diminishes. For bedtime listening, this image comforts deeply. Many people struggle with insomnia due to feeling lost in life, not knowing if they are moving in the right direction. But hearing that humans traveled for millennia by trusting the sky allows the mind to breathe. Perhaps I do not need to know everything to continue. The sky told ancient humans, you have been here before and you will pass here again. And repetition created safety. Being lost was not permanent. The sky was also humanity's greatest story archive. Every culture saw heroes, gods, monsters, lovers, travelers among the stars. These stories were not entertainment. They were self-understanding. Jung devoted his life to myth because he believed myth is the language of the unconscious. When ancient people told stories about the sky, they were speaking about fear, hope, longing, and shadow. The sky became a mirror large enough to hold it all. These stories were told at night, when work ended, fires dimmed, bodies grew tired, and minds opened. This is the same threshold as before sleep, when consciousness steps back and the unconscious speaks. Hearing of the sky as a story holder awakens a deep memory, being told stories in the dark, not to learn, but to belong. Though we no longer live under the night sky as our ancestors did, these stories remain within us. They appear in dreams, unnamed emotions, and the strange familiarity felt when gazing at stars. When retold, Slowly, gently, without urgency, the mind remembers, I have been here before. I was safe. The sky was once calendar, map, and storybook, and at a deep level it still is. It does not demand belief. It only asks for listening. And when you listen long enough, gently enough, quietly enough, sleep arrives just as it did for humans thousands of years ago. Liu, the Milky Way, our home. On very quiet nights, when city lights soften or disappear entirely, the night sky reveals a faint band of light, stretching from one horizon to the other. It is not bright like the moon, not sharp like a single star. It is dim, wide, and soft like a mist of light suspended in darkness. Humans call it the Milky Way. What makes the Milky Way special is not only its beauty, but why we see it this way. It does not appear as a band because it lies out there. It appears that way because we are inside it. We are not observing a galaxy from afar. We are living, breathing, sleeping within its structure. Carl Gustav Jung would see this as a powerful metaphor for the human mind. Much of inner life resembles the Milky Way. We cannot see it as a clear whole because we are inside it. We perceive fragments, feelings, thoughts, moments, without grasping the full picture. The light we see is the combined glow of hundreds of billions of stars. Most are too dim, distant, or obscured to be seen individually. Together they form a continuous, gentle band without needing detail. So it is with the psyche. Most of what shapes you forgotten, memories, unspoken emotions, unnamed experiences, lies outside conscious sight. Yet together they create the feeling of me, vague but real. Before sleep, hearing of the Milky Way as a home offers deep comfort. It whispers, you do not need to see everything to belong. A home usually has walls, doors, clear boundaries. The Milky Way has none. It is open billions of stars coexisting within vast order. Jung believed the deepest sense of belonging comes not from rigid boundaries, but from being held by something larger than the ego. The Milky Way does not require constant awareness. It exists whether you look up or not. It supports the solar system Earth and your body even now as you lie still and listen. This matters deeply before sleep. Many sleepless nights come from feeling unanchored, believing you must hold everything together yourself. But learning that you live within a cosmic home without walls allows the mind to loosen its defenses. In Jungian terms, this is when the ego steps aside to sense the whole, not to dissolve, but to rest. Like a child sleeping peacefully, knowing someone is nearby, the Milky Way says nothing, makes no promises. It simply exists. And sometimes presence alone is enough to slow the nervous system, deepen the breath, and open the door to sleep. We do not see individual stars in the Milky Way because there are too many. Their light overlaps, blends, forming a unified glow. Jung would recognize this as the collective unconscious layers of human experience blending beyond individual awareness. Like the Milky Way, the collective unconscious does not demand analysis. It operates, even when unseen, and it has the power to hold the psyche, especially before sleep. When listeners realize most of the Milky Way's light comes from unseen stars, a subtle shift occurs. Invisible parts of themselves gain value. Unnamed feelings, vague memories, quiet sadness, all contribute to who they are. The need to understand fades, and sleep draws nearer. Jung said humans need not only meaning to live, but belonging to rest. The Milky Way offers belonging naturally. You do not need to earn your place here. You were here from the beginning, and when this is felt deeply, a common anxiety softens the need to prove existence. Before sleep, this anxiety grows louder. If I do nothing, do I still matter? The Milky Way answers, in comforting silence, existence needs no justification. Here, the ego finds its place, not central, not abandoned, but held within a larger order, and tension dissolves. The Milky Way reminds us that true support is often silent. Sleep is the same. It comes not through effort, but through release. As you close your eyes, and let the image of the Milky Way drift through your mind like a soft river of light. The nervous system realizes, I do not need to guard the world. The world has been moving for a long time. It will continue even while you sleep. And in that knowing, sleep is no longer a goal, it is a return. 7. Shooting stars and meteor showers, fragile visitors. Perhaps there is no phenomenon in the sky that makes people both hold their breath and smile softly, quite like a shooting star. It appears without warning, glides across the sky for a few brief seconds, leaves behind a fragile streak of light, and then disappears so quickly that if you blink, you might miss it entirely. For a very long time, humans have associated shooting stars with wishes, as if that fleeting moment opens a small gap between humanity and the universe, a place where secret desires can be whispered. But science offers us a very simple truth: a shooting star is not a star at all. It is only a tiny particle of cosmic dust burning as it enters Earth's atmosphere. And somehow, this truth makes the phenomenon even gentler. Carl Gustav Jung might see a shooting star as a perfect symbol of fleeting contents of the unconscious. Thoughts that flash in and out, memories that briefly surface before sleep, emotions that appear without a name. They are not large, they are not lasting, but when they appear, they can illuminate the entire inner sky. A shooting star does not last long, but it is not meaningless. It completes its entire life within that brief moment. And this is deeply important for the human psyche, especially before sleep, because so much anxiety arises from the belief that if something does not last, then it has no value. The night sky, through the image of the shooting star, whispers a different message. Fragility does not reduce meaning. Sometimes it is precisely because something is brief that it becomes unforgettable. Meteor showers do not occur randomly. They repeat in cycles when Earth passes through streams of dust left behind along the orbit of comets. Thousands of tiny anonymous particles ignite in the atmosphere at once, creating a quiet rain of light. This carries a distinctly Jungian beauty. In Jung's psychology, some experiences do not come once and disappear. They return rhythmically, repeating dreams, familiar emotions that surface at the same time each year. A sadness with no clear cause, yet one that always visits on very quiet nights. Jung called this the rhythm of the unconscious, not to cause suffering but to be recognized. Like a meteor shower, these contents do not seek attention. They simply return steadily enough to say, I am still here. Before sleep, when the mind loosens its grip on the day these inner meteor showers may appear, an old memory, a familiar face, a distant feeling. If we try to push them away, sleep retreats. But if we view them as fragile, visitors arriving and departing, the mind softens. A meteor shower asks nothing of you. You only need to look. And when you look long enough, you realize there is no threat in its appearance. Only movement, only light. And then darkness returns, gentler than before. A shooting star does not allow itself to be held. It does not wait. It does not repeat the same path. It appears, flares, and dissolves, as if its entire existence is concentrated into a single moment. And because of this, it teaches humanity a very difficult lesson: the art of not holding on. Carl Gustav Jung believed that much psychological suffering does not come from what happens, but from our attempt to hold on to what no longer belongs to the present. Memories, emotions, images, when clung to, become burdens, but when allowed to pass through, they complete their natural function. A shooting star is a perfect image of this. It does not stay long enough to be analyzed. It does not invite judgment. It can only be witnessed. And in that act of witnessing, the ego releases control. It opens into a state very close to meditation and very close to sleep. Before sleep, the mind is often full of inner shooting stars, sudden thoughts, random fragments of memory, unanswered questions. If we try to chase them away, they return. But if we allow them to pass like shooting stars, without grasping, without judging, they dissolve naturally. The night sky, through these fragile visitors, whispers, Not everything that appears needs to stay. And this is a deeply healing whisper. Since ancient times, humans have made wishes upon seeing shooting stars. Not because they were certain the wish would come true, but because the moment itself creates openness. When the light streaks across the sky, the ego loosens control for a brief second. And in that opening, the truest desire can emerge. Jung might say that what matters is not whether the wish is fulfilled, but whether it is recognized. Many deep desires only surface when we stop trying to think, and the state before sleep is very similar. Consciousness is tired and the unconscious is allowed to speak. Meteor showers with their cyclical nature remind us that fragile moments do not come only once. They return like the breathing of the universe. And we do not need to be perfectly prepared to receive them. We only need to be present. Impermanence, the very thing humans fear, is, in Jung's view, the condition for transformation. Nothing changes if everything stays still. There is no sleep if the mind clings tightly to the present. Shooting stars in their briefness allow us to practice letting go gently, beautifully. When the listener lies in darkness listening to the story of shooting stars and meteor showers, the nervous system begins to understand there is nothing that needs to be held right now. Thoughts can pass. Emotions can settle. Even desires can be gently set aside. And when there is nothing left to hold, sleep arrives quietly without effort, like the soft darkness after the final streak of light across the sky. Bah! The dark sky and the loss of the stars. There has been a change that has happened so slowly that many people have not realized they have lost something. It was not a loud disaster. There was no explosion, no obvious collapse. It was simply the night sky gradually becoming brighter. City lights spread outward. Streets, buildings, billboards, windows all together illuminate the night. And within that light, the stars quietly disappear. Not because they no longer exist, but because they are no longer seen. Carl Gustav Jung might call this a symbolic loss. For tens of thousands of years, the dark sky was a shared human experience. Whether in deserts, forests, plains, or at sea, humans once looked up at the same sky, deep black, filled with stars and silent. That sky was not just scenery. It was a psychological foundation. When night is dark enough, humans feel depth. Space is not filled. The mind has room to settle. Jung believed that darkness is not the enemy of the psyche, but the condition that allows the unconscious to speak. Without darkness, the deepest images of the soul cannot appear. Today, many people have never seen the Milky Way with the naked eye. They have never experienced standing beneath a sky dark enough to feel gently small, and this absence does not cause immediate pain. It leaves instead a vague emptiness, a sense that something is missing from inner life, though it cannot be named. Light pollution does not only blur the stars, it also enters the mind. Jung warned that a constantly stimulated mind loses its ability to listen to the unconscious, and light, both literal and symbolic, is one of the strongest forms of stimulation. When the sky is no longer dark, night is no longer fully night. The boundary between day and night, activity and rest, fades. And when that boundary blurs, the human mind gradually loses its ability to shift states. Before sleep, humans need an unfilled space, a darkness deep enough for thoughts to dissolve. But when light is always present, even at night, the mind remains in a mild state of alertness, not awake enough to work, yet not calm enough to sleep. Jung might say that this is when darkness is stripped of its healing role. Not the darkness of fear, but the darkness of containment. The dark sky once functioned as humanity's great blanket. When it disappeared, many people began searching for comfort elsewhere, in noise, in information, in endlessly moving images. And so insomnia is not only a biological issue, it is a cultural symptom, a sign that we have lost our natural relationship with night. In Carl Gustav Jung's psychology, darkness is not an empty void. It is a generative space, a place where the deepest images of the psyche are allowed to arise, a region not fully occupied by consciousness, where the unconscious can breathe. The dark sky once served this role for humanity. When night was truly dark, humans could not see far, could not control the entire space around them. And in this gentle helplessness, the mind learned to let go. Not everything needs to be illuminated. Not every shadow is a threat. But when artificial light fills the night, darkness shrinks, not only in the sky but in the mind. Jung might say that a culture afraid of darkness soon becomes afraid of the unlit parts of itself. When we are no longer comfortable being in the dark, we also become uncomfortable being with vague emotions, unanswered questions, purposeless silence. The dark sky once allowed the unconscious to speak to humans through dreams, symbols, and myths. When that sky disappears, many symbols fade as well. Not because they no longer exist, but because there is no longer space to listen. In bedtime listening, remembering the dark sky as an original space creates a feeling of return. A return to a time when darkness was not seen as an enemy, but as a companion. A time when closing one's eyes was not a loss of control, but an entry into another world, the inner world. Today, to see the Milky Way, humans must travel far, to high mountains, to deserts, to isolated islands. What was once a shared human experience has become a rare, almost sacred moment. Carl Gustav Jung emphasized that rare experiences often carry great psychological power, not because they are better, but because they awaken deep layers that have long been dormant. When a person stands beneath a truly dark sky for the first time, the reaction is often not excitement, but silence. A silence that feels full. In that moment, the ego becomes smaller, not in a wounded way, but in a supported one. Familiar thoughts settle. Anxieties lose their urgency. And in that space, the mind can rest in a way that light does not allow. Before sleep, speaking of the value of the dark sky is not meant to create regret. It is meant to gently restore awareness. Darkness is necessary, not to be feared, but to heal. And even if you cannot immediately stand beneath a star-filled sky, you can recreate part of that darkness within by dimming lights, reducing stimulation, and allowing the mind to do nothing. Jung might say that when we restore our relationship with darkness, we also restore our relationship with sleep. Because sleep is not a shutdown, but a return to an ancient human rhythm, when night was truly night, and the sky was truly the sky. In that quiet darkness, the stars, though unseen, are still there, and their silent presence is enough to remind us that not everything valuable needs to be illuminated to exist. Constellations, temporary drawings. When humans look up at the night sky, they do not see only scattered points of light. They connect them. They draw invisible lines between stars, forming figures of humans, animals, heroes, monsters. And from this, constellations are born. What matters is not whether constellations are real. They are not physical structures. The stars within a constellation are often separated by vast distances unrelated to one another. Yet the human mind still sees shapes, still believes in the stories, still remembers them across generations. Carl Gustav Jung would say this is a clear expression of the human instinct to create images. The unconscious does not tolerate pure chaos. It seeks meaning. It connects scattered points into a recognizable form enough to feel safe. Constellations are therefore not merely products of ancient astronomy. They are psychological maps. When humans see shapes in the sky, they are also affirming that the world can be understood, can be told as a story, can be arranged so that it is not overwhelming. Before sleep, the human mind does the same thing. It gathers the scattered experiences of the day and connects them into a story of me. And that story, though not entirely accurate, allows us to fall asleep with the sense that the world still has order. There is a gentle but profound truth about constellations: they are not permanent. Stars do not stand still. Each star moves along its own path through space, and over time, tens of thousands of years, the shapes of constellations will change. The lines humans draw today will not look the same in the distant future. Familiar images will warp, dissolve, and be replaced by new ones. What we believe to be eternal in the sky is in fact eternal only on the scale of a human lifetime. Carl Jung saw in this a deep metaphor for the ego. The human self is also a constellation formed from memories, roles, beliefs, and the stories we tell about ourselves. It helps us orient ourselves. It helps us know who we are, but it is not fixed. It shifts over time through experience, through subtle transformations of life. And like constellations, the ego often changes so slowly that we do not notice. We believe we are the same as before until one day we look back and realize the lines have shifted. Jung called this the process of individuation, a long, quiet journey in which a person gradually becomes themselves in a new form. In the context of listening before sleep, this truth has a very gentle effect. It reminds the listener, you do not need to keep your old shape to be safe. Change does not mean disorder. It is simply a different arrangement. Looking deeper into the history of constellations, we notice something tender. Every culture has drawn the sky in its own way. The stars are the same, but the stories differ. In one place, a hunter. In another, a dragon. Somewhere else, a sleeping god. Carl Gustav Jung called this the language of the collective unconscious. Humans do not look at the sky only with their eyes, but with inner patterns passed down through generations. Constellations become a canvas onto which humanity projects fear, longing, hope, and shadow. They do not reflect the universe as it is, but reflect who humans are at that moment. What is remarkable is that while the drawings change, the need to draw never disappears. Humans always need a story to connect scattered points, not for objective truth, but for reassurance. A completely chaotic sky would unsettle the mind. A sky with shapes, even temporary ones, allows humans to breathe more deeply. In the mind before sleep, this happens every night. The scattered events of the day are connected into a thread. Today's story, who I was today. That story may not be fully accurate, but it is enough for the ego to feel temporarily safe and let go. Jung believed dreams continue this work, redrawing the lines in deeper, more symbolic ways. When listeners hear that constellations are only temporary drawings, they may recognize something comforting. They do not need to hold on to old stories to exist. Shapes can change, while the need for meaning remains. And it is that need, not the shape itself, that endures. Jung emphasized that the ego is not the enemy, but neither is it a permanent center. It is like a constellation, useful, necessary, but temporary. When the ego clings tightly to its current shape, it becomes tense. When it is allowed to change, it can rest. Knowing that constellations will dissolve over tens of thousands of years does not bring sadness. It brings deep relief. Because if even the sky does not need to keep its shape forever, humans do not need to be unchanging to have value. Before sleep, much tension comes from trying to maintain an image, being this kind of person, living this way, staying true to lines drawn long ago. But the story of constellations whispers you can allow those lines to soften, not to disappear, but to be redrawn when needed. In Jungian language, this is the moment when the ego makes room for the self, a larger, more flexible whole. When this happens, the mind no longer needs to stay alert. It does not need to hold its shape. And when there is nothing left to hold, sleep can arrive. The night sky, with constellations slowly shifting across timescales longer than a human life, becomes an ancient lullaby. No shape is eternal, and you do not need to stay awake to guard it. When the listener allows these words to settle, the body understands there is no threat in loosening. Thoughts can dissolve like the lines between stars. And in the open space that remains, 10. The sky of two hemispheres, two different perspectives. There is a very quiet truth about the night sky that we rarely stop to consider. None of us has ever seen the entire sky. If you live in the northern hemisphere, there are constellations you will see your whole life. And there are also constellations you will never see no matter how long you live, if you never leave where you are. In the southern hemisphere, people look up at a different sky, different images, different stories. Half of humanity grows up with stars that the other half can only hear about. Carl Gustav Jung might see this as a profound symbol of the human experience. No one possesses the whole perspective. No one has a complete view of the world of truth or even of themselves. Each person, like each hemisphere, has access only to part of the picture, and this is not a flaw. It is the nature of things. In the collective unconscious, humans often carry the anxiety that, if I do not see everything, if I do not understand everything, then I am lacking. But the sky of two hemispheres whispers a different message. Differences in perspective are not losses. They are what make the world vast. Before sleep, when the mind releases its search for omniscience, accepting that one sees only a part can bring a very deep relief. Not everything needs to be known. Not every experience needs to belong to you. There are beauties that exist without being meant for you, and that is entirely okay. The northern and southern hemispheres are not only geographically different, they represent two symbolic worlds. The familiar constellations of the north, with their own mythological stories, do not appear in the south, and vice versa. Two halves of humanity have grown up beneath different sky stories, forming different symbolic systems, different understandings of cosmic order. Jung emphasized that the human psyche is deeply shaped by the symbols one lives with. When we look up at the night sky and see familiar images, we are also seeing our own inner structure reflected. And when two groups of people see two different skies, they develop different ways of sensing the world. Not right, not wrong, simply different. In modern life, many conflicts arise from forgetting this. We often believe that our perspective is the shared sky, that what we see must also be what others see. But the sky of two hemispheres reminds us that there are experiences you cannot access unless you change position. And before sleep, this realization is deeply healing. It allows the mind to stop comparing, stop judging, stop trying to unify everything into a single answer. Instead, the mind can rest in the thought, the world is larger than what I can see. Carl Gustav Jung often described the human psyche as an asymmetrical structure. There is the part we see clearly, consciousness, and there is the part we cannot directly see, the unconscious. These two parts are not separate, but they never appear fully at the same time. This closely resembles the sky of two hemispheres. In the northern hemisphere, some constellations are always present, circling a fixed point in the sky. In the southern hemisphere, that fixed point does not exist in the same way, and a different sky opens up. Both are true. Both are complete in their own way, but neither is the whole. Jung would say that humans suffer when they believe they must see both skies at once. We want to fully understand ourselves. We want to grasp every emotion, every motive, every deep layer. But the structure of the psyche does not allow this. We always stand in a particular hemisphere, shaped by personal history, culture, and lived experience. And this is not a deficiency to be corrected. It is the condition that allows the psyche to exist. If consciousness could see the entire unconscious at once, it would be overwhelmed. Just as if we could see the entire sky of both hemispheres at the same time, all orientation would be lost. Before sleep, when the boundary between consciousness and the unconscious becomes thinner, accepting that you see only a part can bring a very deep reassurance. You do not need to understand everything happening inside you tonight. There are stars that appear only in another hemisphere of the mind, and that is completely natural. One of the deeper causes of insomnia is the desire to control the entire inner experience. We want to know why we are anxious. We want to resolve every feeling before allowing ourselves to rest. But the sky of two hemispheres whispers there is no state in which a human can see everything, and there is no need to. Jung emphasized that healing does not come from infinite expansion of consciousness, but from a harmonious relationship between consciousness and the unconscious. This is like acknowledging that there are constellations you will never see unless you change position, and you do not need to change position right now. When the listener lies down and allows the story of the two skies to settle into the mind, something very subtle happens. The ego stops demanding omniscience. It accepts that parts of the world and of the self are unfolding beyond its view, and in that acceptance, tension dissolves. The sky of two hemispheres does not divide humanity. It reminds us that the world is always richer than a single perspective. And when you allow yourself to remain within your own perspective, without comparison, without envy, without trying to possess the other, the mind can rest. Before sleep, this is a great gift. You do not need to carry the entire sky into bed with you. You only need to carry your own portion of the sky enough to feel familiar, enough to feel safe. And when you close your eyes, the stars you cannot see are still there. They have not disappeared. They are simply outside your field of view, like parts of you that are temporarily at rest. In that trust, sleep arrives not as surrender, but as a gentle reconciliation with reality. No one needs to see everything in order to be at peace. Shayi, the Andromeda Galaxy, seeing another universe with the naked eye. On nights when the sky is dark enough, quiet enough, if you are patient and stand for a long time in silence, you may see a very faint streak of light. It is not as distinct as a star. It has no familiar shape like a constellation. It is only a dim blur, so subtle that it might disappear if you are not sure you truly saw it. That is the Andromeda Galaxy. What makes Andromeda special is not its appearance, but the truth behind it. It is another galaxy beyond our Milky Way, a massive structure containing hundreds of billions of stars existing independently more than 2 million light-years away. And somehow, its light still reaches us weak enough, fragile enough to be seen by the human eye. Carl Gustav Jung might see this moment as a rare psychological experience, realizing that reality is far larger than one's familiar world. For most of life, humans live inside their own galaxy, familiar relationships, repeated thoughts, personal stories. We believe this is the entire universe. But occasionally a different light appears at the edge of awareness, reminding us there are other worlds. Before sleep, this realization does not overwhelm. It brings a deep stillness. Because when we realize we are not the center of everything, the burden of the ego lightens. Not because we become meaningless, but because we no longer have to carry the whole of reality. The light from Andromeda left that galaxy more than 2 million years ago. When that journey began, modern humans did not yet exist. Cities had not been built. The stories of you, of me, of this world, none of them had begun. And yet that light kept traveling, without haste, without stopping, without needing to be witnessed. It crossed immense space, passed through time longer than any personal memory, and eventually reached your eyes, perhaps at this very moment, as you lie still and listen. Jung might call this an encounter between the deep unconscious and present consciousness. Many things in the human psyche are like this as well. They begin long before we become aware of them. Emotional patterns, unnamed sadness, familiar reactions all carry histories longer than a single lifetime. What matters is this: the light still arrives. And the unconscious does too. It finds ways to touch consciousness through dreams, vague feelings, silent moments before sleep, not to disturb, but to remind us that the present does not stand alone. In bedtime listening, the story of Andromeda softens the anxiety that everything must make sense immediately. If light can travel for 2 million years to be seen, perhaps not every feeling needs to be understood tonight. Unlike the brilliant images from telescopes, Andromeda, seen with the naked eye, does not overwhelm. It does not demand admiration. It exists only as a suggestion. And it is precisely this humility that makes the experience profound. Carl Gustav Jung would call this a non-coercive expansion of consciousness. There is no pressure to understand, no demand to analyze. Only the recognition that the world does not end at familiar boundaries. Just as psychologically, there are moments when we realize that who we are is more than the story we have told for years. Before sleep, consciousness softens. The rigid structures of the ego, who I am, what I must do, what I must control, begin to loosen. And in that state, knowing that one can see another galaxy with one's own eyes brings a quiet peace. There are things beyond our control, and they are not frightening. Jung believed that psychological growth does not come from inflating the ego, but from placing it in its proper position. Andromeda does not diminish humanity in a negative way. It diminishes the ego so that the deeper self has space to appear. In the darkness before sleep, Andromeda is like a small door opening onto the infinite, not to be crossed, but to be known as existing. The light from Andromeda has traveled for more than 2 million years to arrive here. During that time, Earth changed countless times. Species appeared and vanished. Civilizations never named were born and collapsed. And none of this stopped the light from continuing its journey. Carl Jung said that modern humans often suffer because they identify too closely with the present moment. We believe our worries are central, urgent, impossible to postpone. But when we encounter the vast time of the universe, the mind has a chance to loosen its contraction. Andromeda whispers, time is not rushing, and you do not need to rush either. If light can travel 2 million years without needing to be seen, perhaps you can allow yourself to rest without resolving everything right now. In the state before sleep, this brings a clear release. Personal problems do not disappear, but they lose their urgency. They become stars in your own galaxy, still there, but no longer filling the entire sky. Andromeda, as another universe visible to the naked eye, becomes an ancient lullaby. The world is larger than your worries, and you do not need to guard it all night. When the listener lets these words settle, the body begins to understand that there is no danger in letting go. Breathing slows, muscles soften, and sleep arrives not as escape, but as a temporary harmony with the long flow of cosmic time. Shura, the life and death of stars. There is no cry when a star is born, no dramatic explosion as humans imagine. The birth of a star happens very slowly, very quietly, within vast clouds of dust and gas drifting through space. Over millions of years, matter gathers, compresses, until a point of light begins to burn, not in haste, but because the moment has arrived. Carl Gustav Jung might see in this a familiar image of how the human soul forms. None of us becomes ourselves in an instant. We take shape, gradually, from vague experiences, unnamed emotions, early fragments of memory that consciousness does not clearly recall. The ego, like a star, begins to shine only after a long, silent accumulation. Before sleep, when the pace of the day slows, hearing about the birth of stars brings a gentle comfort. Every beginning takes time. Nothing needs to rush into being. There is no pressure to be complete right now. If the universe allows millions of years for a star to be born, perhaps humans can allow themselves not to be finished yet. The night sky in this moment is no longer a place of dazzling points of light. It becomes a reminder that even light begins in darkness. Not all stars die in the same way. Some swell, turn red, and slowly fade. Others end in a violent explosion, scattering their material across space. But every star grows old. Jung believed that human psychological life also passes through such stages. After the ego forms and stabilizes, it begins to change. Values that once felt essential soften. Desires that were once intense grow quieter. Not because life loses meaning, but because meaning is shifting into a different form. In modern society, aging is often viewed with anxiety. But in the image of stars, aging is not meaningless decline. It is a phase of transformation. A star grows old not to disappear uselessly, but to prepare for something deeper, to return material to the universe so that new generations of stars can be born. Before sleep, this thought offers a subtle reassurance. It reminds us that change is not failure. No longer being the same does not mean you are losing your light. Perhaps that light is simply changing color, softer, deeper, less blinding. Jung called this the stage when the ego gradually gives way to the self, the larger totality of the person. And like the aging of a star, this shift does not need drama to be meaningful. The death of a star is not what humans usually imagine death to be. It is not an absolute end. When a star dies, what disappears is not existence itself, but the source of light. Light created millions or even billions of years earlier continues traveling through space, crossing unimaginable distances, until one day it reaches Earth. This means that when you look at the night sky, you may be seeing stars that no longer exist. They died long ago, but their light is still on its way to you. They are still present, not as objects, but as cosmic memory. Carl Gustav Jung would see here a profound image of psychological life. In the human psyche, many things have also died on the surface. Relationships that ended life, phases that closed older versions of ourselves that no longer exist. But their light, memories, emotions, traces continues to shine. And this is not a mistake. It is how the soul works. Before sleep, these old lights often appear most clearly. A face, a voice, a familiar, distant feeling. We may worry, why am I still thinking about this? But the story of stars whispers light does not vanish when its source goes out. And that does not mean you are stuck. It simply means you are human. Jung called this symbolic continuity. What once mattered does not disappear abruptly. It withdraws gradually at its own rhythm. And sometimes its light only needs to be acknowledged, not pushed away, to continue its journey and dissolve naturally into darkness. In Jungian psychology, death is rarely understood as absolute ending. It is usually a symbol of transformation. One form dissolves so another can appear. One role closes so a new depth can open. And sleep, in a very gentle way, carries the same symbolic structure. Each night, consciousness dies temporarily. Not to vanish, but to make room for the unconscious. Daytime thoughts step back, control loosens, and another world, the world of dreams, images, deep feelings, begins to speak. Jung believed this is not loss, but a necessary cycle for the wholeness of the soul. When listeners understand that stars die but their light continues, they can begin to see sleep differently, not as a frightening void, but as a gentle continuation. You do not disappear when you sleep. You simply do not need to shine in the daytime way for a while. In the moments before sleep, this brings deep comfort. You do not need to hold on to everything. You do not need to live everything in a single day. What mattered has already sent out its light. The rest can be entrusted to time. Jung would say that when we no longer fear symbolic death, the end of a day, a thought, a state, we can truly rest. And rest is not giving up. It is trusting a process larger than oneself. The night sky with stars that have died yet still shine becomes a deep lullaby. Nothing precious disappears at once, and you do not need to stay awake to guard its light. When these words settle, the body understands there is no danger in letting go. Thoughts can fade, feelings can soften, and like the light of a star that has fulfilled its task, consciousness can rest. In that trust, sleep arrives not as an ending, but as a quiet continuation of the journey of being alive. Shazam, color, rhythm, and the vibration of stars. If you have ever looked at the night sky for a long time, you may notice that stars are not all the same. Some shine with a cool white light. Some glow softly yellow, warm and gentle. Others carry a muted red hue, like embers burning slowly in the dark. These colors are not decoration. They reflect a star's temperature. Blue-white stars are very hot. Yellow stars are moderately warm. Red stars are cooler, older. The universe does not speak in words, but it speaks in color. Carl Gustav Jung might recognize here a familiar language of the unconscious. In the human psyche, emotions rarely appear as clear concepts. They come as tones, warm or cold, light or heavy, bright or dark. We do not say, I am experiencing a complex psychological state. We say, my heart feels cold, or there is something warm in my chest. Before sleep, consciousness grows tired and logical language recedes, but sensation remains. And when we hear that stars also speak in color, the mind can relax with its own vague feelings. There is no need to name them precisely, no need to understand, only to feel. Jung believed that healing begins when we allow inner states to exist without forcing them into clarity. A star does not need to explain why it is red. It is simply red, and that is enough. Not all stars shine steadily. Some pulsate. They expand and contract, grow brighter and dimmer in a stable cycle. From Earth, their light appears to breathe slowly, rhythmically, without haste. These stars, called variable stars, have become measures of cosmic distance. Through their steady rhythm, humans can calculate how far away a galaxy is. What is remarkable is this not because they are the brightest, but because they are stable in their oscillation. Carl Gustav Jung might smile at this truth. In Jungian psychology, mental health is not found in the absence of fluctuation, but in rhythmic fluctuation. Humans do not need to be constantly stable. They need rhythms the soul can lean into. Before sleep, many people worry because their emotions shift. Calm, then anxious. Light, then heavy. But variable stars whisper a different message. Fluctuation is not disorder. Fluctuation can be a sign of a deep structure functioning well. In the unconscious, humans have such rhythms too. Sleep and waking, dreaming and awareness, advancing and retreating along life's path. Jung believed that when we resist these natural rhythms, we suffer. When we listen to them, we are supported. Hearing about stars that breathe in distant space, the pre-sleep mind can begin to adjust its own rhythm. There is no need to force immediate calm, only to slow down like a star gently expanding and contracting in the dark. At the deepest level, the universe is not still. It vibrates. Stars oscillate in their own rhythms, their light changing in cycles, and these vibrations spread like a wordless song through space. Strangely, it is these subtle oscillations that allow humans to measure distances, understand structure, and locate themselves within immensity. Carl Gustav Jung would call this synchronicity outer rhythms mirroring inner rhythms. Within the human psyche, there are quiet oscillations, heartbeat, breath, emotional cycles. We usually notice them only when they are disrupted. Most of the time, they work silently, keeping inner life from collapsing. Jung believed the unconscious communicates with consciousness, not through arguments, but through rhythm and image. A dream that returns cyclically, an emotion that reappears seasonally, a longing that surfaces at the same hour each night. These oscillations are not errors, they are signals, and like variable stars, their value lies in regularity, not intensity. When listeners hear about vibrating stars, they may allow small inner vibrations to exist. No need to silence them, no need to outrun them, simply staying with the rhythm long enough for body and mind to realize they are not alone in their movement. One of the greatest misunderstandings about rest is the belief that it requires absolute stillness. But the universe teaches otherwise. Stars are not still to be stable. They are stable within their movement. The steady pulse of variable stars allows cosmic measurement. A steady inner rhythm allows humans to find sleep. Jung would say sleep does not arrive when the ego controls everything, but when the ego synchronizes with the deeper rhythm of the self. This requires no effort, only listening. Like listening to a slow song, you do not need to understand every note to be lulled. You only need to let the rhythm carry you. As the listener lies down and lets the story of color, rhythm, and stellar vibrations sink in, the nervous system begins to adjust. Breathing finds its natural depth. Heart rate softens. Scattered thoughts blend into a shared vibration, gentle, unfocused, undemanding. The night sky with stars that change color with temperature and breathe in cycles becomes an ancient lullaby. You do not need to be still to be at peace. You only need to find your rhythm. And when that rhythm is found, even softly, sleep arrives. Not like a switch turning off, but like a synchronization. Consciousness steps back. The unconscious speaks, and you are carried on the gentle wave of vibration that has supported the universe long before you appeared. 14. Red giants, supernovae, and the rebirth of matter. There are stars that do not fade away quietly. Before their end, they expand and become red giants. Their light grows softer, redder, spreading through the surrounding space like a prolonged final breath. They take up more space in the sky, as if saying farewell slowly and with full presence. Carl Gustav Jung might see here a very familiar image of psychological life. Before major transformations, human beings often expand. Emotions grow deeper. Memories surface more frequently. Large questions arise, not because everything is about to collapse, but because a phase is reaching completion. Red giants do not fail when they can no longer remain as stable as before. They are simply entering the final stage of a long cycle. And in that stage, they carry a very different kind of beauty, not sharp, not dazzling, but deep, warm, and encompassing. Before sleep, this image offers a subtle comfort. There are moments in life when we feel we are too much, too sensitive, too reflective, too full of memories. But perhaps, like a red giant, this is not a sign of disorder. It may be a sign that a cycle is ripening. Jung believed that psychological maturity does not occur by shrinking oneself, but by allowing what has accumulated to be fully present, even if only for a short time. When a red giant can no longer hold its structure, it ends in a supernova explosion. From a human perspective, this is a violent event, but on the scale of the universe, it is an act of giving. In that moment, the star releases all the material it created throughout its long life. Heavy elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, calcium, are scattered into space. These very elements later become the foundation of planets, oceans, and living bodies. The blood in you, the bones in you, the breath in you, all carry traces of those ancient explosions. Carl Jung would call this a creative death. In Jungian psychology, some endings are not meant to close things off, but to transfer energy to something else. A role ends so a new identity can appear. An old belief dissolves so a deeper meaning can be born. Before sleep, many people fear major changes because they feel like explosions. But the image of the supernova whispers, not every disintegration is a loss. Some endings need intensity in order to release what has been accumulated for too long. And what matters is this: the star does not know it is creating new life. It simply completes its cycle. Rebirth happens afterward, without the control of the source. When a star explodes into a supernova, nothing of it is truly wasted. The fragments of matter ejected into space do not vanish into nothingness. They drift very slowly, merging into cosmic dust clouds, quietly waiting millions of years to become part of new structures. Another star, another planet, an ocean that has never had a name. Carl Gustav Jung would see here a precise image of how the unconscious preserves what has ended. In human life, experiences that seem finished do not disappear. They transform. A sorrow becomes empathy. A loss becomes depth. A painful period becomes the foundation of silent understanding. Jung called this the continuation of psychic energy. No emotion dies completely. It leaves its old form to exist in another subtler one. And like the matter of a supernova, these parts often reveal their value only when we stop trying to hold them within their old structure. Before sleep, when consciousness loosens its grip, these fragments may surface not to disturb, but to be integrated. And if we do not push them away or judge them, they will find a new place within the larger picture of the soul. The image of material rebirth, therefore, is not merely an astronomical story. It is a gentle reminder that none of your experiences are meaningless. However they ended, they still carry the potential to nourish something else. A supernova keeps nothing for itself. In its final moment, it gives everything away. And it is precisely this complete giving that makes the universe richer. This may seem paradoxical, but Jung emphasized that wholeness does not come from accumulation, but from circulation. In human psychology, periods of difficulty with sleep often arise when we try to hold on to something that has reached its end. A thought, a feeling, an image of who we are. We fear that if we let go, we will become empty. But the universe offers a different image. When we let go at the right time, that emptiness becomes fertile ground. Before sleep, the image of red giants and supernovae can be heard like a very deep lullaby. It does not urge you to change. It only whispers you do not need to carry everything into sleep. Some things have completed their task today. Some emotions have already shone enough light. Jung would say that sleep is a rite of transition. Consciousness releases. The unconscious receives. And like the universe after an explosion, a new order will form without your control. When the listener allows this image to settle, the body begins to understand there is no threat in ending a day. Nothing precious is lost when you rest. What needs to continue will continue in its own way. The night sky, carrying the memory of ancient explosions that formed the very matter within you, becomes a truthful lullaby. You are made of continuation, and you can sleep peacefully in that. In this trust, sleep arrives not as withdrawal, but as a temporary merging with the greater cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Shawu, the remnants of dead stars, neutron stars, pulsars, magnetars. After a supernova explosion, not everything always disappears completely. Some stars, after shedding their outer layers, leave behind an extreme core, small, unimaginably dense and heavy beyond human comprehension. This is a neutron star. A neutron star can contain more mass than the Sun, compressed into a space only a few tens of kilometers wide. Their matter no longer exists in familiar ways. Atoms are crushed. Electrons and protons merge. Reality itself is pressed to its final limits. Carl Gustav Jung might see in this image a profound symbol of extreme psychological experience. There are events in life, loss, trauma, collapse, that do not completely destroy a person but compress them. After such events, people often become smaller, more closed, quieter. Yet within them lies an immense density of experience. Before sleep, many people carry a heaviness they cannot name. Not because something is wrong, but because they have passed through phases where the soul had to compress itself in order to survive. Neutron stars whisper that becoming dense does not mean becoming meaningless. Sometimes it is the only way to continue after an explosion. Jung believed that after major trauma, the psyche does not immediately expand. It contracts. And this contraction, when understood, can become the foundation for a rare depth. Some neutron stars do not exist in silence alone. They rotate rapidly and emit regular pulses of energy like a cosmic heartbeat. From Earth, we observe them as pulsars, stars that send signals so precise that humans once used them as astronomical clocks. What is remarkable is this, that rhythm arises from an extreme structure, not from softness, but from compression pushed to the limit. And because of that, the pulsar's rhythm is astonishingly stable. Carl Jung would see here a deep metaphor for inner life after upheaval. Some people, after great loss, no longer express emotions as they once did. They speak less, fluctuate less. But within they find a new rhythm, steady and resilient. Jung did not view this inward closing as pathological if it was not forced. He believed that after trauma, the soul needs a stable rhythm to avoid disintegration. The pulsar in its regularity is like a lullaby for minds that have passed through chaos. You do not need to open right away. Just keep the rhythm. Before sleep, hearing about pulsars can help listeners accept that peace is not always gentle. Sometimes it is simply the act of continuing to beat slowly, steadily in the dark. Among stellar remnants, magnetars are the most extreme. Their magnetic fields are so strong that if a magnetar came close to Earth, it could disrupt electronic devices and even affect matter at the atomic level. And yet, most of the time, magnetars are quiet. They carry almost unimaginable power but rarely display it. Carl Gustav Jung would see here a precise symbol of deeply contained psychological energy. Some people do not express strong emotions outwardly. They are not overtly angry, not excessively joyful. They do not speak much about what they have endured, but within them lies a powerful emotional field held in order not to harm themselves or others. Jung distinguished clearly between repression and containment. He did not see containment as unhealthy when it was conscious. A magnetar does not suppress its energy out of fear. It contains that energy as a fact of its existence. And this capacity to contain is what allows it to remain stable at least for long periods. Before sleep, many people carry unexpressed energies, tension, anger, sadness, longing. Not all of these need to be released immediately. Sometimes what is needed more is a space safe enough to contain them. The magnetar whispers, "You do not need to explode to be real." And in that quiet containment, the body can begin to relax. Not because the energy disappears, but because it is no longer treated as a threat. Neutron stars, pulsars, magnetars, all are remnants left behind after violent cosmic events. They are not beautiful in familiar ways, not radiant, not gentle, but they carry a different kind of beauty, the beauty of survival and depth. Carl Gustav Jung once said that the deepest part of the human soul is not light, but accepted darkness. When we no longer fear the extreme parts within us, strong emotions, heavy memories, inexplicable states, they lose their destructive power. They become foundations. Before sleep, this is an essential message. Sleep does not come when everything is resolved, but when we stop resisting what is present. You do not need to turn your extreme parts into light. You only need to allow them to exist just as the universe allows neutron stars to exist, small, heavy, silent. Jung would say that wholeness does not require perfect balance. It requires inclusion. And when the deepest parts are included, the ego can rest. No need to guard. No need to adjust. The night sky with its extreme stellar cores quietly rotating through space becomes a deep lullaby. You do not need to be light in order to rest. You only need permission to exist. When these words settle, the body begins to loosen. Sharp thoughts soften. Heavy emotions lose their sense of threat. And, like a silent magnetar in the universe, the mind can rest within its own depth. Sleep arrives not by erasing extreme parts, but by being with them in safety. And this is a rare kind of peace, not fragile, not artificial, but deep and enduring, like the core of a star that has passed through death. Shallow, black holes, invisible but powerful centers. Black holes do not emit light. They do not reflect. They do not reveal form. We cannot see them with the naked eye, nor can we observe them in the usual sense. And yet black holes are among the most powerful entities in the universe. We know they exist not because they appear, but because everything around them moves. Stars orbit an invisible center. Cosmic gas and dust are drawn into inescapable paths. At the center of most galaxies, including our own Milky Way, there exists a supermassive black hole, silently holding the entire structure in balance. Carl Gustav Jung would immediately recognize this symbol. In Jungian psychology, there are centers that do not appear in consciousness, yet govern the whole of inner life. Jung called them core complexes, or deep unconscious centers, where unnamed memories, emotions, and psychic energy accumulate. We do not see them, but we live around them. Before sleep, many people feel themselves drawn towards something vague, a sadness without clear cause, a sense of emptiness, a recurring thought that will not leave. Not because they are weak, but because an invisible center is operating. The black hole whispers, not everything that influences you needs to be seen. And this recognition alone can ease the mind. You do not need to illuminate every dark corner to be at peace. Some things exist best when allowed to remain in darkness. What makes a black hole extraordinary is not only its invisibility, but its gravity. Once matter comes too close, it cannot return. Not because it is violently devoured, but because the structure of space-time itself has changed. The paths that once existed are gone. Jung would say that psychological life also has such moments. Times when a person is drawn towards something essential, not by conscious choice, but by deep attraction. A crisis, a loss, a recurring dream, a sense that one cannot continue living as before. Jung called this the call of the self, the deeper totality of the person. When the ego has drifted too far from the center, the unconscious creates a pull to bring the person back. This experience is rarely comfortable. It can feel like being drawn into a psychological black hole. Old meanings dissolve, time feels distorted, identity trembles. But like the black hole at a galaxy's center, this unconscious core does not exist to destroy but to reorganize. Without such gravity, stars would scatter. Without such a deep center, inner life would lose direction. Before sleep, hearing that black holes are not enemies of the universe can bring quiet comfort. The heavy feelings you carry are not necessarily signs of error. They may be signs of return to what is deepest and truest. When these images settle, the body begins to relax. There is no threat in letting go. There is no danger in darkness. Just as the universe trusts its invisible centers, the mind can trust its own. The night sky becomes a final, gentle whisper. You do not need to see everything to be held. And in that trust, sleep arrives softly, naturally, without force. Should see galaxies, diversity, collision, and union. When humans first looked beyond the Milky Way, they were astonished. Not because there was only one other galaxy, but because there were countless galaxies, each with its own shape. Some are graceful spirals with luminous arms curling slowly like breath. Some are elliptical, rounded, quiet, ancient. Others are irregular, distorted, as if they never found a stable form. The universe does not choose a single pattern. It allows diversity to exist side by side. Carl Gustav Jung would see here a deep truth about the human psyche. There is no single correct type of soul, no ideal inner form that everyone must achieve. Some people develop with clear, stable structures. Others change constantly, hard to grasp. Others carry parts that have never been neatly arranged. Jung called this richness an expression of the collective self, the greater whole that includes all differences. When we try to force our psyche into a single shape, we resist the very law by which the universe operates. Before sleep, hearing that galaxies do not need to resemble one another to exist can bring a gentle reassurance. You do not need to be the right shape. You do not need to be as stable as others. If the universe can hold distorted galaxies, your mind can also hold unfinished parts without shame. Another truth about galaxies often worries people: they collide. Over billions of years, galaxies approach one another, pass through each other, stretch and reshape one another. But what is striking is that these collisions are rarely total destruction. They are reorganization. Stars almost never collide directly. Instead, gravity alters paths, creates new streams of stars, triggers the birth of new ones. After collision, a new galaxy, larger, more complex, can emerge. Carl Jung would call this an image of encounters between psychological complexes. When two large parts of the psyche, two values, two identities, two life phases collide, we often fear we will break. But Jung believed conflict does not necessarily lead to disintegration. If held long enough, it can lead to union at a higher level. Before sleep, many people carry unresolved collisions between who they were and who they are becoming, between personal desires and external expectations. But the story of galaxies whispers collision is not a mistake. It is a natural stage of development. No mature galaxy has avoided disturbance, and no deep soul has avoided contradiction. In the vast stillness of the universe, the Milky Way and Andromeda are moving toward one another, without haste, without noise. Just a slow motion lasting billions of years. When they meet, they will not defeat each other. They will intertwine, stretch, and eventually merge into a new structure, larger, more complex, carrying traces of both. Carl Gustav Jung would see this as a clear image of the union of opposites. In Jungian psychology, growth does not mean eliminating one side to keep the other. It means allowing opposing forces, reason and emotion control and surrender, old and new, to coexist long enough for a new form to emerge. The meeting of the Milky Way and Andromeda does not happen in an instant. It unfolds. There are moments of chaos, moments of silence, streams of stars torn apart, regions of new stars born. Jung called the similar human process individuation, a long journey in which one does not become someone else, but becomes a more inclusive version of oneself. Before sleep, when the mind is exhausted from choosing what to keep, what to let go of, who to be, this story brings deep reassurance. You do not need to decide tonight. Some unions happen only when time is sufficient, and time in the universe and in the soul always knows its work. The most beautiful aspect of galactic mergers is this: no galaxy disappears completely. Stars from old structures continue to exist only within a new order. Old motions leave traces. New shapes carry memory. Jung emphasized that healing does not mean forgetting, but integrating. When a person unites conflicting parts within themselves, they do not erase the past. They carry it without being ruled by it, like a new galaxy that remembers collision without living in chaos. Before sleep, this message is gentle and freeing. You do not need to clean your mind to rest. You do not need to resolve every conflict. You only need to allow different parts to coexist within a safe space, like stars coexisting after a merger. The night sky with galaxies slowly colliding and merging becomes a deep lullaby. You do not need to choose one part and discard another to be at peace. Peace can come from letting everything be exactly where it is for now. When these words settle, the body understands. There is no danger in pausing. Conflicts do not need to be resolved tonight. They are moving in their own rhythm, very slowly but with order. And just as the Milky Way moves toward Andromeda without force, sleep arrives when you stop trying to merge everything immediately. Consciousness steps back. The unconscious takes over. A deeper order begins to form quietly, without pressure. In that darkness, you rest, not because everything is finished, but because everything is already on its way toward union in the manner of the universe itself. 18. Star clusters and globular clusters, ancient families of stars. In the universe, stars are rarely born in solitude. Most of them come into being together within vast clouds of gas and dust, where gravity gathers matter into stellar families. When the first light ignites, it is not a single star that appears, but an entire group sharing a common origin, age, and cosmic memory. Carl Gustav Jung might see in this image a fundamental truth about human psychology. No one is formed in absolute isolation. Each ego is born within relationships, with family, with culture, with stories that existed long before we became aware of ourselves. Jung called this deep layer the collective unconscious, the place that holds ancient patterns we did not create ourselves yet still carry. Like a star within a cluster, human beings grow up inside a field of influence that already existed. Familiar emotions, instinctive reactions, recurring images in dreams all bear the imprint of having been born alongside other stars. Before sleep, many people feel a vague sense of loneliness. But the story of star clusters whispers you have never truly been alone. Even if you cannot see them, ancient connections are still holding you in their orbit, gently, steadily, without demand. Among stellar families, there are special structures called globular clusters. They are dense, spherical collections of stars containing hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of stars. What makes them unique is not only their shape, but their age. The stars within globular clusters are among the oldest that still exist, formed at the dawn of the universe. They are like living fossils, carrying the memory of a time when the universe was still young. While galaxies change, collide, and merge, globular clusters remain quiet, enduring, almost untouched by disturbance. Carl Jung would immediately recognize this image within the human psyche. He called such structures archetypes, ancient psychological patterns that persist across all eras. Images such as the mother, the hero, the shadow rebirth, these do not belong to any single individual. They are like globular clusters within the soul, very old, very resilient, and not easily altered by external circumstances. Before sleep, hearing that there are parts within you that are ancient, that have survived countless upheavals, can bring a profound sense of safety. You are not only the worries of today, you also carry layers of memory that have endured billions of years of psychological evolution. Like globular clusters orbiting a galaxy, these ancient parts quietly keep your psyche from falling apart even as life around you keeps changing. When we look at a star cluster, we do not only see many stars close together, we sense a shared gravitational field. The stars are born nearly at the same time from the same cloud of matter, and for a long time they share an orbit influenced by collective gravity. Even if some stars later drift away, the memory of their original bond remains imprinted in their motion. Carl Gustav Jung would call this the primordial need for belonging. Before the ego formed, before we learned to name ourselves, we lived within a relational field. We were held supported, shaped by other stars, parents, community language, oral stories. Even after growing up and separating, the soul still carries the memory of once belonging to a cluster. Before sleep, this sense of belonging often resurfaces. It is not always clear. Sometimes it appears as a vague wish for someone to be near, a nameless longing, or a warm feeling when thinking of a place where you once felt like yourself. Jung believed these emotions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of deep connection that daytime consciousness often overlooks. The story of star clusters whispers that even when you feel you are walking alone, you are still moving within an invisible field of relationships formed long ago. You do not need to see them to be supported. Globular clusters exist like ancient islands drifting around galaxies. They have witnessed countless transformations, galaxies colliding, stars being born and dying, cosmic structures changing. And yet they remain nearly unchanged, not because they are rigid, but because they have found a very deep equilibrium. Carl Jung would say that similar globular clusters exist within the human soul. They are values, archetypal images, and deep feelings of right and wrong, safety and danger, love and loss, accumulated over thousands of generations. They are not loud. They do not argue. But when personal life becomes chaotic, these ancient structures keep us from disintegrating. Before sleep, when social roles temporarily recede, you may sense the presence of these inner globular clusters. A feeling that no matter how today has been something very old and very steady, is holding you in orbit, not to control you, but to lull you into rest. The night sky with its ancient stellar families becomes a lullaby of deep time. You do not belong only to today. You belong to a greater current one that has known many nights of darkness and many dawns. When this message settles, the body understands there is no need to hurry. Personal worries shrink not because they are unimportant, but because they are placed within a wider context. And within that context, sleep arrives as a return to the ancient rhythm of being held, being contained, and belonging. Shuzo, the moon solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and the rhythm of time. Long before humans knew calendars, clocks, or the idea of precise time, the moon was quietly keeping count. It waxed, waned, and became full again, repeating its cycle tirelessly. Its light changes slowly enough to be felt intuitively through the body rather than measured in numbers. Carl Gustav Jung might call the moon an archetypal symbol of lived time, time that is felt rather than calculated. In Jungian psychology, humans live not only in the linear time of clocks, but also in the cyclical time of the unconscious. Emotions return. Dreams repeat, inner themes reappear, according to the seasons of life. For tens of thousands of years, the moon has taught humanity that not everything moves forward. Some things return not because we have failed, but because this is the natural rhythm of life. A crescent moon is not a lesser moon. It is simply in another phase of itself. Before sleep, this understanding brings deep comfort. If today you feel as though you are moving backward, tired, or less radiant than on other days, it does not mean you are losing something. Perhaps you are simply in a waning phase of the soul, a phase that needs darkness to prepare for fullness again. Among lunar phenomena, solar and lunar eclipses have always caused people to pause. Not because they last long, often only minutes, but because they interrupt familiar order. Light is obscured. The sky changes color. Space becomes unusually quiet. Since ancient times, these moments were considered sacred, not out of superstition, but because they created a rare collective experience, an entire community, witnessing light disappear, without it being night, and then return. A pause in ordinary order. Carl Jung would say, these are clear images of moments when the unconscious rises. In psychological life, there are also eclipses, times when the familiar ego is obscured and deeper contents emerge. Unexplained sadness, strange dreams, brief feelings of disorientation. Jung did not see these moments as dangerous. He saw them as natural rites of transition. Like eclipses, they do not last forever. They simply remind us that light does not always need to be present for life to continue. Before sleep, hearing about moments when light is obscured can help listeners fear their own inner darkness less. Not all darkness is a sign of loss. Some darkness is only temporary concealment, necessary for the soul to adjust its rhythm. In Carl Jung's symbolic language, the moon does not represent reason or control. It represents the unconscious intuition, inner movements, that do not require daylight to exist. The moon reflects the sun's light just as the unconscious reflects consciousness, not creating light but transforming and softening it. The moon's rhythm is slow and steady. It does not rush. It does not demand that humans keep up. And because of this, for thousands of years, people unconsciously synchronized their inner lives with its cycle planting, harvesting, ritual rest, and sleep itself. Jung believed that when humans disconnect from natural rhythms, they lose part of their ability to self-regulate psychologically. The moon once helped people know when to act and when to withdraw. The full moon was a time of rising energy. The waning moon a time to gather inward, accumulate, and rest. Before sleep, listening to the story of the moon allows the mind to remember an ancient rhythm, one based not on productivity, but on balance. You do not need to optimize sleep. You only need to allow yourself to be in the right phase of this night. The moon never rushes to become full, and neither do you. Solar and lunar eclipses create a special experience. Light disappears in collective stillness. When the phenomenon occurs, people often stop speaking, stop moving, and simply stand and look up, not out of fear, but because something deep is happening, a suspension of familiar order. Carl Jung would call this a spontaneous, meditative moment. As light withdraws, the ego retreats slightly. Familiar narratives pause. And in that space, humans touch a deeper layer of experience, one that does not need understanding, only presence. Before sleep, this state is very familiar. When lights go out, noise fades, and the body lies still, consciousness begins to recede. And if we do not resist, a natural meditative space appears. No technique required, no effort needed. Just allowing daytime light to withdraw gently. The night sky with the moon and its rare veils becomes a deep lullaby. You do not need to shine all the time. Some moments are designed to be lived in darkness, not to frighten but to listen. When this message settles, the body understands that darkness is not the enemy of light. It is its partner. And just as light returns after every eclipse, after every deep sleep, consciousness also returns renewed, gentler. Seen this way, sleep is no longer an interruption of life, but a sacred ritual repeated every night. A ritual the moon has guided humanity through, long before we knew how to name it. Asher, planets, lights that do not flicker. In the night sky, among countless twinkling stars, there are points of light that do not shimmer. They stand steady, their glow even and constant. From early on, humans noticed this difference and called them planets, slow wanderers among the stars. Venus glows softly at dusk and dawn. Jupiter is large, slow, and majestic. Saturn is quiet, with a pale golden light unassuming. These planets became so familiar that humans once gave them stories, gods, and spiritual meanings. Carl Gustav Jung might see in the planets images of stable psychological centers within a person. While emotions flicker like stars, there are parts of us that maintain steady, light, core values, deep beliefs, qualities refined over time. Jung believed maturity is not about eliminating fluctuation, but about recognizing the planets within the parts not shaken by temporary turbulence. Like planets in the sky, they do not need to attract attention by flickering. Their quiet presence is enough to orient us. Before sleep, imagining these steady lights brings a strong sense of safety. If today your mind feels unstable, remember not everything within you is unsettled. Some parts are standing still, doing the work of keeping you in orbit. From Earth, planets appear gentle. Venus shines like a jewel. Jupiter seems regal. Saturn appears calm and composed. But when humans approach them through science, another truth emerges. These worlds are extremely harsh. Venus is hot enough to melt lead. Jupiter is a never-ending storm. Saturn has no solid surface to stand on. The familiar planets seen up close become environments hostile to life as we know it. Carl Jung would see this as a subtle psychological metaphor. Some parts of a person appear very stable and beautiful from a distance, a strong belief, a rigid principle, a clear social role. But if we get too close, if we fully identify with them, we may be burned or crushed. Jung warned against identifying the ego with an archetype. Planets have their own orbits. They maintain order through distance. The human psyche works the same way. Core parts should be respected, but we do not need to live inside them at all times. Before sleep, this is a gentle reminder. You do not need to remain strong, stable, or ideal all day. Perhaps it is time to step back slightly, observe from a safe distance, and allow your inner planets to continue their motion in their own rhythm. Planets never stop moving, but they move along stable orbits. The right distance from the sun allows them to exist, not too close to burn, not too far to freeze. Life, at least as we know it, can only emerge when distance is respected. Carl Gustav Jung saw this as a deep psychological principle. Not everything inside us needs to be held tightly. Some emotions, beliefs, and ideals must be kept at the right distance to avoid becoming extreme. When we move too close to an idea of ourselves, I must be strong, I must control, I must always be positive, that idea can become as harsh as the surface of Venus. Jung called this balance the proper relationship between ego and unconscious contents. Not denial, not identification, just awareness and allowance for movement. A planet does not try to touch the sun to prove its worth. It simply continues along its established orbit. Before sleep, this image brings great relief. You do not need to enter every thought that arises. You do not need to fix, correct, or judge them. You only need to keep a safe distance, allowing them to move without exhausting you. Stars flicker because their light is distorted by Earth's atmosphere. Planets do not. Their light is steady, slow, and reliable. They do not need to vibrate to be recognized. Their presence alone is enough. Carl Jung would say, this is the image of integrated presence. When a part of us is fully accepted, it does not need to draw attention. It does not need to react strongly. It simply exists quietly, steadily, without needing to prove itself. Before sleep, many people are tired of having to flicker to respond, to perform, to explain. But the story of the planets whispers you do not need to fluctuate in order to exist. Some parts of you are already stable enough to rest in their own light. As this image settles, the body relearns a different way of being. Without tension, without vibration, without chasing, the heart rate slows, breathing deepens, thoughts lose their urgency. The night sky with its unflickering lights becomes a calm lullaby. You do not need to do anything more to be here. Simply remain in the orbit of this night. That is enough. Sleep arrives not as collapse, but as a gentle continuation of motion. Just as a planet continues its journey through darkness, you continue to exist even while consciousness rests. Archeyi, comets, ancient messengers of the solar system. Comets do not appear often. They come from the farthest regions of the solar system, carrying ice, dust, and primordial material that has existed since the beginning. For most of their lives, comets drift in darkness, silent and nearly forgotten. Then one day they return brilliant, with long tails crossing the night sky like a wordless message. Carl Gustav Jung might call comets symbols of ancient, unconscious contents. Within the human psyche, there are parts that are very deep and very old, rarely appearing in consciousness. They may sleep for years, even a lifetime. But when conditions are right, they return in dreams, in sudden emotions, in questions without clear answers. Comets carry primordial matter, just as the unconscious carries archetypal memories never fully touched. When they appear, people often feel both fascination and unease. Not because they are dangerous, but because they disrupt the familiar sense of everyday order. Before sleep, hearing about comets can help listeners accept that not everything in the mind needs to appear frequently to be meaningful. Some parts only need to be remembered at the right moment. And when they return, our task is not to control them, but to listen. Throughout human history, each appearance of a comet left a deep impression. Ancient peoples saw them as omens, sometimes auspicious, sometimes threatening. But beyond fear or reverence, comets always made people stop and look up. Carl Jung would say that such moments awaken the collective unconscious. When a rare phenomenon appears in the sky, it is not only a physical event. It becomes a shared psychological experience, reminding people they are part of something far greater. With their long orbits and return cycles of decades or centuries, comets resemble ancestral memories passed through generations. Not everyone encounters them in life, but when we do, we feel we are witnessing something beyond personal time. Before sleep, this feeling is important. It makes personal worries smaller, not because they are insignificant, but because they are placed within a long current of history and memory. Jung believed that when people connect with this collective depth, the psyche becomes steadier, less prone to panic. Comets remind us you are not living only in this moment. You are continuing a very long story, and sometimes that story returns to whisper something that needs remembering. Comets spend most of their existence far from the sun, in the cold, dark regions of the solar system. There, time moves so slowly, it almost stands still. Their material remains preserved, little altered, as if stored in frozen memory. Only when their orbit brings them close to the center does light and heat awaken what has slept, causing the comet to blaze and leave a long trace behind. Carl Gustav Jung would see this as a precise image of deep, unconscious contents. In the human mind, there are memories, emotions, and archetypal images that do not operate in daily life. They lie far from conscious awareness, protected from erosion by time. But when a major event occurs, when a life phase ripens, they are drawn back toward the sun of consciousness and suddenly become vivid. These moments often confuse people. Why does an old memory return? Why does a feeling once thought resolved come back so strongly? Jung did not see this as regression. He saw it as a purposeful return. Just as comets do not return randomly, unconscious contents do not surface without reason. Before sleep, when consciousness softens, the unconscious has more space to send messages. The comet whispers, "Some things only need to be seen once." They do not stay long. They do not ask to be held. They only need to be recognized, and then they retreat again to a safe distance. And it is precisely their rarity that gives them meaning. One beautiful aspect of comets is that after they blaze, they leave. They do not stay to be admired forever. They do not try to claim the sky. They leave behind memory a deep impression, and then continue their long journey in darkness. Carl Jung would say the unconscious works the same way when respected. When an image, a dream, or an emotion is heard properly, it does not need to repeat itself. It withdraws not because it is pushed away, but because its task is complete. Before sleep, this is a gentle lesson. You do not need to hold on to every thought that arises. You do not need to resolve every emotion before closing your eyes. Some things come only to remind, and if welcomed softly, they will leave on their own. The night sky with a rare comet passing through becomes a lullaby about impermanence without fear. Not everything that arrives is meant to stay, and this is not loss. When listeners allow these inner comets to come and go, the body begins to relax. There is no need to grip tightly, no need to control. Consciousness understands it does not need to stand guard all night. Sleep becomes a safe space where ancient visitors may arrive and depart without disturbance. And in that trust you are lulled into rest, not through forgetting but through deep acceptance of your own rhythm of arrival and departure. Ashar, aurora. When Earth interacts with the sun, auroras are not born from calm. They arise from solar wind streams of highly energetic particles rushing through space. When they meet Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere, instead of destroying, this energy transforms into light green, violet, pink, moving slowly like ribbons of silk across the night sky. Carl Gustav Jung might see in this phenomenon a deep symbol of psychological transformation. In inner life, there are also intense energies: anger, fear, grief, longing. When uncontained, they can be destructive. But when they encounter a strong enough magnetic field awareness, acceptance, or a safe space, they can become something beautiful and meaningful. Auroras whisper not all energy needs to be eliminated. Some energy only needs redirection. Earth does not block the solar wind. It interacts with it, slows it down, softens it, and turns it into a rare aesthetic experience. Before sleep, this image offers great comfort. If today you feel strong emotions within you, it does not mean something is wrong. Perhaps you simply need a space safe enough for transformation, like the polar night sky. What makes auroras possible is Earth's magnetic field, an invisible layer of protection, unseen yet strong enough to guide cosmic energy safely. Without it, solar wind would erode the atmosphere, making life impossible. Carl Jung would call this magnetic field healthy psychological boundaries. As people mature, they learn to build invisible boundaries, knowing what to take in, what to keep at a distance, when to open, when to close. Not to isolate, but to protect the capacity for transformation. Jung believed that a psyche without boundaries is easily overwhelmed by external energy expectations, pressures, collective fear. But a psyche with flexible boundaries does what Earth does. It allows energy in, but along paths it can bear. Before sleep, this is a gentle reminder. You do not need to absorb everything that happened today. You are allowed to let some energy pass by keeping only what can be transformed into light, even if very faint. The magnetic field does not create light. It only allows light to appear. Auroras are not avoidance of conflict. They are the result of collision. Solar energy and Earth's atmosphere meet at the edge where two worlds touch. And it is precisely at that boundary that beauty emerges. Not at the center, not in absolute safety, but at the point of contact. Carl Jung saw conflict as the engine of psychological development. When opposites within us, conscious and unconscious, control and surrender, reason and emotion meet, tension arises. If one side is eliminated, energy becomes destructive. But if both are allowed dialogue, a new symbol can emerge, just as auroras emerge from collision. In Jungian analysis, symbols are how the unconscious softens conflict without resolving it logically. Auroras are such a symbol of the universe. They do not explain solar wind, do not block energy, but turn it into something that can be contemplated. Before sleep, the mind needs such symbols. Instead of trying to understand every emotion from today, you can let them pass as images, slow, soft ribbons of light without words. Jung believed that when symbols arise, conflict no longer needs to shout, and in that quiet energy begins to regulate itself. Those who have seen auroras often say they did not speak. They stood still, looking up, letting the light pass. There was no intense excitement, only deep stillness, as if time paused. Carl Jung would call this an unintentional, meditative experience. When the mind encounters something both powerful and gentle, the ego no longer knows what to do, and so it lets go. In that moment, consciousness and the unconscious briefly move together. Before sleep, this state is precious. Sleep does not come when we have processed the day, but when we stop processing. Auroras, with their slow movement and soft light, become a perfect lullaby. You do not need to do anything with this energy. Just watch. As this image settles, the body relearns how to be with energy without being swept away. Tensions from the day do not need to vanish. They only need to be held within a field safe enough for transformation. The night sky where earth and sun meet in gentle light becomes a wordless ritual. Even the violence of the universe can become peace. And if that is true for the universe, it can also be true for you. Strong emotions are not enemies of sleep. When properly contained, they become background light, soft enough to drift into rest. Sleep arrives not because energy is exhausted, but because energy has found a safe form. And in that quiet light, you are lulled into the night, held, protected, and allowed to rest. Arshasan, invisible light, the multispectral picture of the universe. When we look up at the night sky, we believe we are seeing the universe. Twinkling stars, the gentle moon, sometimes a non-flickering planet. But the truth is, human eyes touch only a tiny portion of reality. The universe is broadcasting a much larger symphony of light, from long, slow radio waves to sharp, intense gamma rays that our eyes cannot perceive. Carl Gustav Jung might linger long over this idea. In Jungian psychology, consciousness is only a thin slice of mental life. Most of what drives human beings, motives, memories, symbols, fears, desires, exists outside conscious awareness, like the invisible bands of cosmic light. We often believe what we see is everything. But Jung reminds us, what matters most is often not in the light. Just as the universe is not silent because we cannot hear it, the human soul is not empty because we cannot name what is happening within it. Before sleep, as room light dims and eyes no longer work, you may begin to feel more than you see. A heaviness or lightness in the chest. A vague image. An incomplete thought. This is not disturbance. These are the invisible lights of the mind touching you softly, quietly. The universe does not tell its story with a single voice. It whispers in radio waves, sings in visible light, vibrates in infrared, and occasionally screams in gamma rays. Each band carries different information: where stars are forming, where matter is dissolving, where energy is compressed to extremes. Carl Jung would call this an image of the multi-layered soul. Humans do not only think, we also feel, intuit, inhabit bodies, and dream, each layer speaking a different language. When we listen to only one voice, reason for example, we miss most of the inner symphony. Jung emphasized that psychological imbalance often comes from listening to the wrong channel. We try to explain emotions with logic. We try to control intuition with plans. We use words to handle what can only be felt, like trying to hear music by looking at sound waves. Before sleep, this is a gentle invitation. You do not need to understand everything in one way. If something within you cannot be expressed today, it does not mean it is meaningless. Perhaps it is speaking in another frequency, and night is the best time to listen. There is something deeply similar between the universe and the human mind. Most of what is important does not speak in words. Radio waves do not glow. Infrared does not show form. X-rays and gamma rays leave no color for the eye. Yet they carry information about star birth, transformation, and extreme energy. Carl Gustav Jung called the analogous layer in humans the unconscious. The unconscious does not argue. It does not present theses. It communicates through images, sensations, symbols, and subtle bodily movements. A sadness without cause. A recurring dream. A feeling of knowing without explanation. Jung believed that when people ignore these invisible signals, they do not disappear. They change intensity. Like cosmic energy observed without proper instruments, they still exist but may become disruptive. Psychologically, this can appear as fatigue, insomnia, or unexplained emptiness. Before sleep, when daytime language loses effectiveness, the unconscious begins using its multi-spectrum to communicate. A gentle warmth in the chest, a fleeting image, a partial memory. This is not disorder. It is how the soul tells its story when it is not forced to be clear. And like invisible light in the universe, these signals do not need to be seen to matter. They only need permission to exist. There is a special moment just before falling asleep, when we stop trying to see, understand, or control. The world softens, sounds recede, light fades, and in this reduction, a silent symphony begins. Carl Jung believed sleep is not disconnection, but a change of channel. Consciousness steps back. The unconscious speaks not in words, but in rhythm, not in bright light, but in gentle bands of invisible light. When listeners allow themselves not to see everything, not to name every feeling, the body begins to relax. Breathing slows. Scattered thoughts lose weight, like darkness becoming safer when we stop staring into it. The night sky, with its multispectral picture, unseen by the naked eye, becomes a deep lullaby. You do not need to perceive all of reality to rest. You only need to trust that many layers are operating on your behalf. In that trust, sleep arrives as a merging not into empty darkness, but into a world full of invisible movement, where everything continues according to its own order. And just as the universe keeps broadcasting its multispectral symphony, whether we listen or not, your soul continues its work of healing, organizing, and rebalancing, even while you sleep. Tonight you do not need to see. You only need to be within the music. 24. Time and light. Everything is memory. When we look up at the night sky, we are not looking at the present. Light needs time to travel, and so every point of light we see is a memory arriving late. The nearest star sent its light a few years ago. More distant galaxies sent theirs millions, even billions of years ago. The sky, therefore, is not a scene unfolding in real time, but a living chronicle. Carl Gustav Jung might linger for a long time with this idea. In Jungian psychology, human beings do not live only in the present. Every thought, every emotion carries traces of the past, not only personal past, but collective past as well. When we feel sadness without knowing why, when an image in a dream touches us deeply, it may be a kind of light that departed long ago from the unconscious. Jung believed that memories never disappear. They only move slowly. Some experiences need many years to reach the surface of consciousness, just as light needs millennia to reach the earth. And when they arrive, we are often surprised, even confused, because we do not remember when we sent them out. Before sleep, this understanding can bring great tenderness. If something rises within you tonight, an old sadness, a memory you thought was forgotten, it does not mean you are regressing. Perhaps you are simply seeing the light of an experience that is now ready to be recognized. If we could read the sky, we would see each chapter of the universe written in light. Light from the first stars, light from young galaxies, light from explosions that ended long ago yet are still telling their stories. Carl Jung called the psychological equivalent of this living memory. Not memory as stored data, but memory as an ongoing current of influence. Ancient patterns, archetypal images, stories passed from generation to generation. All of these are psychological light, still traveling through time. Jung suggested that people often suffer not because the past exists, but because they do not realize they are living within its light. When an emotion appears, we assume it belongs to the present, but it may have begun long before. Understanding this does not erase the past, but it makes it less frightening. Before sleep, the sky whispers softly, "None of your emotions arise without cause. Everything you feel has a journey, a point of origin, a story behind it." And just as light continues to arrive, even when a star has changed, your experiences continue to influence you. Not to bind you, but to be seen at the right moment. There is something deeply similar between the universe and the human mind. Most of what matters does not speak in words. Radio waves do not shine. Infrared light has no visible form. X-rays and gamma rays leave no color for the eye. Yet these are precisely the carriers of information about where stars are born, where matter transforms, where energy reaches extreme thresholds. Carl Gustav Jung called the analogous layer in human beings the unconscious. The unconscious does not argue. It does not present theses. It communicates through images, sensations, symbols, and subtle bodily movements. A sadness without a clear reason. A recurring dream. A feeling of knowing that cannot be explained. Jung believed that when people do not listen to these invisible signals, they do not disappear. They change intensity. Like cosmic energy observed without the right instruments, they continue to exist, but may become disruptive or dangerous. Psychologically, this can appear as fatigue, insomnia, or an unexplained sense of emptiness. Before sleep, when daytime language is no longer effective, the unconscious begins to communicate through its own multi-spectrum, a gentle warmth spreading in the chest, a fleeting image that vanishes, a fragmentary memory. This is not disorder. It is how the soul tells its story when it is not forced to be clear. And like the invisible light of the universe, these signals do not need to be seen to have value. They only need permission to exist. There is a very special moment, just before falling asleep, when we stop trying to see, to understand, or to control. The world becomes softer, sounds recede, light dims, and within this reduction, a silent symphony begins. Carl Jung believed that sleep is not a disconnection, but a change of channel. Consciousness steps back. The unconscious speaks not in words but in rhythm, not in bright light but in gentle bands of invisible light. When listeners allow themselves not to see everything, not to name every emotion, the body begins to relax. Breathing slows. Scattered thoughts lose their weight. Just as darkness becomes safer when we stop staring into it. The night sky, with its multispectral picture that the naked eye cannot fully see, becomes a deep lullaby. You do not need to be aware of all reality in order to rest. You only need to trust that many layers are operating on your behalf. In that trust, sleep arrives as a merging not into empty darkness, but into a world full of invisible movement, where everything continues according to its own order. And just as the universe continues to broadcast its multispectral symphony, whether we listen or not, your soul continues its work of healing, arranging, and rebalancing, even while you sleep. Tonight, you do not need to see. You only need to be within the music. Asha Wu. Conclusion. Returning to stillness. After all the stars, the galaxies, the explosions, the slow movements, stretching across billions of years, this journey does not close with a clear conclusion. It closes with stillness. Because the universe, like the human soul, does not need to be fully explained in order to be meaningful. Carl Gustav Jung once said that what matters most in psychological life is not understanding, but living with. After passing through the vast images of the universe, you are not asked to remember everything. You are only invited to return to the feeling of being held. The night sky is no longer a place to explore. It becomes a cradle, a space so vast that it asks nothing of you. No questions, no tasks, no expectations, only a surrounding presence, wide, deep, patient. Before sleep, this is the most important moment, when consciousness no longer needs to go any further. When every journey is allowed to pause, Jung believed that the deepest healing occurs when the ego stops searching and allows itself to be held by something larger. You do not need to understand the universe to belong to it. You only need to be here in this moment, where every movement has slowed enough to become calm. In the immensity of the universe, humans are very small. A fragile body, a brief life, a consciousness that lights up only for an instant. But Jung would remind us that smallness does not mean isolation. On the contrary, it is precisely because we are small that we are always connected to earth, to sky, to time, to light that traveled a very long way to reach our eyes. Light from distant stars has journeyed millions of years to reach this moment. The moment when you are lying down, closing your eyes, and listening. This means you are living within a network of connection, deeper than any personal thought. Jung called this network the whole, not an abstract idea, but the felt sense that your life, though small, exists within a meaningful order. Not because everything is good, but because everything is held. Before sleep, this feeling of being held matters more than any advice. It allows the nervous system to soften. It allows the mind to stop guarding. It allows you not to be right enough or finished. You are allowed to be a small human being supported by a very large sky. When night deepens, the sky is no longer something to search. It becomes a vast cradle in which every movement slows. The stars no longer call for attention. The darkness no longer threatens. Everything is present to hold, not to challenge. Carl Gustav Jung viewed sleep as a return to the self, the deepest center of the person. In this state, the ego no longer needs to control or defend. It is allowed to be set down like a child resting its head on a familiar pillow. And the unconscious, like the night sky, quietly does its work, arranging, connecting, healing. Here, the sky is no longer infinite distance. It is containment. The lights that traveled millions of years do not come to overwhelm you. They come to whisper that you are in the right place, within that long flow. Not too early, not too late, simply at the right moment to rest. Before sleep, as your body settles, imagine the sky as a great open hand above you, not touching, not grasping, just being there. Jung believed that when humans sense this support, personal anxieties naturally soften, not because problems vanish, but because they are placed within a wider space. In that space, you do not need to keep going. You have arrived. Light is memory, time is a current, and the human being, though small, is the place where these two meet, in a moment that is fragile and real. Jung would say that the meaning of life does not lie in holding this moment forever, but in allowing it to pass with trust. As the journey closes, you do not need to carry anything with you. The stories of the universe have completed their task, widening perception, softening boundaries, and guiding you closer to stillness. Now that stillness is not empty. It is full of time, of light, of wordless connection. The night sky whispers its final lullaby. You are small, and that is safe. Small because you do not have to carry the entire universe. Safe because the universe is carrying you. When you close your eyes, nothing is missed. The stars are still there. Time is still flowing. And your unconscious, like the sky, continues its work, patient and gentle. Sleep arrives not as an ending, but as a return to the breath. A return to benevolent darkness, a return to the cradle of night. And in that return, you are allowed to rest, not because everything is finished, but because everything is being held. As the final words of this journey settle, the night sky grows quieter. There are no more questions to answer, no images to remember. Only a very light feeling remains, the feeling of being set down, supported, and permitted to rest. Throughout this path, we have moved together, through starlight, the slow motion of galaxies, ancient rhythms of time and the unconscious. But none of this was meant to make you understand more, or know more. It was only meant to open a space wide enough for you to stop holding yourself so tightly. Carl Gustav Jung believed that deep within every human being, there is a still center, a place untouched by anxiety, not carried away by thought needing to prove nothing. This place is not reached through effort, but returned to when effort stops. And sleep is the most natural doorway back to it. At this moment, you do not need to carry what you have heard. You do not need to remember the Big Bang, light stars, or deep symbols of the mind. All of that has done its work. It has brought you closer to stillness, and now it can gently withdraw. Let the night sky do the rest. Let your breath find its slow rhythm again. Let your body sink slightly as if into a very deep mattress. Let the last thoughts drift by without holding them. You are not small in a way that should frighten you. You are small in a way that places you within a vast order, one where nothing asks you to stay awake all night. Out there, light from distant stars continues its journey. Time continues to flow slow and patient. And inside you, the unconscious continues its work, organizing, healing, connecting, even when you are unaware. You do not need to stay and control this. You are allowed to rest. If something from today remains unfinished, let it remain so. Like the sky, you do not need to resolve every movement in order to remain stable. Some things only require time, and sleep is part of that time. Now, you may allow your eyelids to close completely. Allow sounds to grow more distant. Allow the world to blur, not because it disappears, but because it is being safely held outside. And in this quiet space, just before sleep truly arrives, let me offer one small reminder. You do not need to fully understand yourself to be at peace. You do not need to be perfect to rest. You only need to be present, and even that will soon no longer be required. Thank you for spending this moment here with Stories for Sleep. This channel was created for nights like this, nights when you need a safe place for the mind to slow down, for emotions to settle, and for sleep to arrive as naturally as possible. If these stories bring you comfort, help you sleep more deeply, or simply help you feel less alone at night, you may choose to subscribe and join us on future journeys. Each subscription is a very gentle way of saying, I would like to return here when I need rest. Stories for Sleep will remain here, slow, quiet, with new stories, new journeys, and the same single purpose, helping you find peace before sleep. For now, there is nothing more to do, nothing more to listen to. Good night. May you sleep deeply, peacefully, and be supported by a sky that is your own.